All right, we're going to go in to the book of Revelation, chapter 18 now. But let's remember where we were in chapter 17. That chapter 17:1 took us into the bowls of wrath. Because 17:1 said, and one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls. And in chapter 17, we're still in the sign of the bowls of wrath. And we have this harlot here, this immoral harlot committing acts of immorality with the kings of the earth. And we've seen that she, in verse 3, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. She's trying to ride as Babylon has fallen. The nation of Babylon has fallen. She's immediately hooking up with the next nation, the next kingdom. She's sitting on this beast who's coming to power, the Antichrist, Satan. She's aligning herself with that. And God hates that. She's unfaithful to God. This is the last of the dead bone religion of church, of so-called church. And we saw in verse 16 of chapter 17, and about the beast and the 10 kingdoms were rising up with him. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. Satan and his kingdom and his people are going to hate not only the born-again Christians who are rising up to heaven and the Jews that have turned to their Messiah, but they're going to hate even the religion. And they're going to have, what does it say in verse 17? For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose. God is going to have a common purpose with Satan and his kingdom of eliminating this dead religion. And why has this happened? Because Babylon was another nation before the tribulation that God allowed to rise up, that God used. And man ruled through God's authority in it. And Babylon fell at the beginning of the tribulation. We're going to read about it in this chapter 18. But Babylon fell, and the kingdom of the beast, the kingdom of the Antichrist, Satan has fallen to earth, and he's coming to power. He's going to have a very short time to rule and reign on earth. And she immediately, unfaithful as she is, and as moral as she is spiritually, she hooks up with, or wants to hook up with this kingdom of the beast, kingdom of Satan. But the kingdom of Satan and God are not having it, and they're going to bring judgment on her. And in chapter 18, verse 1, we read again, after these things, like I've said, this is one of the three things you must understand to understand this book. The first one is that this is a revelation of Jesus Christ. This whole book is. It's to the church. And the second thing you must understand is every time John says after these things, he's totally changing subject. This is not a continuous story through here. Every time he says this, he's changing subjects. And every time you see an angel, it's bringing you a specific message from God to that subject John has you in. So John has changed subjects here. But why are we going into Babylon and changing subjects when we just talked about Babylon? Because the Babylon we just talked about in chapter 17, that Babylon, the religious Babylon, is still here in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation because Satan is bringing an end to her with God's purpose. So the religious Babylon is still here after the nation and the commerce of Babylon has fallen. Babylon is that ruling country that rules over the earth leading up to the tribulation. It's that country that rules over the earth that will fall, as it says, we'll see shortly. In 1 hour of 1 day, that nation will fall, like the Babylon did in the Old Testament. And as that nation falls, Satan, who has been cast to earth then, will rise up and have his own kingdom. And he will bring an end to that dead religion with God's purpose and his purpose aligned. And as he rules and reigns and wants to exterminate the born-again Christians, the born-again Jews, the Israelis that have turned to him, God is going to come back and put an end to his kingdom, and then God, through the Lord, will rule and reign with us on earth. And that's why Babylon here is mentioned so late, even though it happens at the beginning of the tribulation. Because it's the end of man ruling upon earth. It's the end of man ruling upon earth by God's authority. Once God has Babylon fall, and then he comes back and brings an end to Satan, the kingdom of the beast, and Satan ruling on earth, then he is going to come and rule. It's the end of man ruling upon earth by God's authority. That's why it's mentioned here. And in the Old Testament, Babylon was a nation that God allowed to rise up. And then he had them take his people slaves for 70 years because they had been so unfaithful to him. And then they had God's people in slavery to 70 years, to where the ones who had been there at the end, when Babylon falls, Old Testament Babylon falls very quickly too. But those people of God that were in Babylon only knew Babylon. That was their home. They loved Babylon. And so, one other thing you have to understand is, in the early church time, the apostles, if you study early church history, and you can see it right here in 1 Peter 5:13, the apostles referred to Rome as Babylon. It says in 1 Peter 5:13, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. They referred to Rome as Babylon because they knew through Paul especially, and here John, they knew that Babylon represented the ruling power of the earth that would rule the earth, that must fall quickly for the Antichrist to come to power. And you see in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, it says, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy come first. The end will not come unless this great falling away comes first. And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple the Jews are building, like I told you, of God, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things? And then he goes on to say, listen here, saints, and you know what restrains him now. You know what, Paul's saying, you know what restrains him in Paul's days, in those days of the apostles. He says, you know what restrains him, so that in his time, the Antichrist, he may be revealed, but he's being restrained. Verse 7, for the mystery of the lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains him will do so until he is taken out of the way. And then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the spirit of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That is the one who is coming in accord with the activity of Satan. All these things we've been talking about, with all the power and signs and false again, wonders. The early church, they looked at Rome as Babylon because they knew the Antichrist could not come to power until that ruling country, that country that ruled over the known world, fell. When it fell, Satan, the Antichrist, could come to power. And they knew that, and they referred to Rome as Babylon. And so we have Babylon here in these end times. It wasn't Rome. Babylon is here now at the end times, 2,000 plus years later. And in the Old Testament, like I said, Babylon was that country, that kingdom that was in power until it fell, but it held God's people in slavery. They were there, they know that as their country. And when that Babylon fell, it fell hard and it was troubling. And if you read, I'm going to quickly go just through some passages in Jeremiah chapter 51. You can go back and read the whole chapter, but it talks about the fall of Babylon. And I'm just going to touch upon some of these verses so you'll know how Babylon fell and what happened and what God's purpose was. In chapter 51 of Jeremiah, just starting at the beginning, but I'm going to jump. Thus says the Lord, behold, I am going to arouse against Babylon. Now it'll be against this end times Babylon and against the inhabitants of Leb-Kamal. That means the one who exalts himself has risen up, referring to Babylon, the spirit of a destroyer. And I shall dispatch foreigners to Babylon, that they may whittle her and may devastate her land. For on every side they will be opposed to her in the day of her calamity. One thing I see here is that there are immigrants flooding into Babylon right now from every country of the world. And God is bringing them in. And he's going to use them to further devastate Babylon once it falls. And I'm just going to jump through to verse 7. And Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of the Lord. All these nations, all these kingdoms, like I said, through the seals, you can see it. They rule and reign by God's authority. God brought Babylon up. And Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of the Lord, intoxicating the earth. The nations have drunk of her wine. Therefore, the nations are going mad. Suddenly, Babylon has fallen and been broken. Wail over her. Forsake her, and let us each go to his own country. Babylon's full of foreigners, and let us each go to her own country. For her judgment has reached to heaven and towers up to the very skies. Going on further. Surely I will fill you with a population of locusts. They will cry out with shouts of victory over you. Once again, this Babylon, who we're soon going to talk about and expose, it's being filled with immigrants from all over the world, and God is allowing it. God's bringing that about for a reason. Further in Jeremiah, and the praise of the whole earth been seized. How Babylon has become an object of horror among the nations once it falls. The sea has come up over her. We talked about an asteroid hitting in the ocean. We'll see that in some other verses later. But scientists say if an asteroid hits in the ocean, it will create waves up to 600 feet high. And look what it says here, how Babylon has become a horror among the nations. The sea has come up over Babylon. She has been engulfed with its tumultuous waves. Her cities have become an object of horror, a parched land and a desert. Further on, and the nations will no longer stream into him. Even the wall of Babylon has fallen down. Come forth from her midst, my people, and each of you save yourselves from the fierce anger of the Lord. Now, lest your heart grow faint, and you be afraid at the report that will be heard in the land, for the report will come 1 year, and after that, another report, another year, and then violence will be in the land. And going on further, for the Lord is going to destroy Babylon, and he will make her loud noise vanish from her, and their waves will roar like many waters. These waves again being created by this asteroid hitting. And the tumult of their voices sounds forth, for the destroyer is coming against her, against Babylon, and her mighty men will be captured. Their bows are shattered, for the Lord is a God of recompense. He will fully repay, and he shall make her princes and her wise men drunk, her governors, her perfects, and her mighty men, that they may sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake up, declares the king. Going on further, so Jeremiah wrote in a single scroll all the calamities which would come upon Babylon. That is, all these words which have been written concerning Babylon. Then Jeremiah said to Sarah, as soon as you come to Babylon, then see that you read all these words aloud, and say, Thou, O Lord, hast promised concerning this place to cut it off, so that there will be nothing dwelling in it, whether man or beast, but it will be a perpetual desolation. And it will come about, as soon as you finish reading this scroll, you will tie a stone to it and throw it in the middle of the Euphrates. Once again, like the asteroid we seen hitting the ocean. He's in Babylon. There was no ocean there. But he told him, tie a stone to this word and throw it in the river, just like the asteroid hitting in the ocean. And say, just so shall Babylon sink down and not rise again because of the calamity that I'm going to bring upon her, and they will become exhausted. Thus are the words of the Lord to Jeremiah. So we see that this calamity is going to come upon Babylon. We see that Babylon's here. We see in the book of Revelations that Babylon falls. And in chapter 17, don't be confused. That was the religion that's left that God's going to bring an end to at the last half of the tribulation through this kingdom of Satan. In chapter 18 starts with after these things, because we're totally changing subjects, as I told you. We're now going to see Babylon just as it's falling and as it has fallen. We're going to see this unfaithful woman, this unfaithful religion is with Babylon, is with the nation. She's always with the nations. She's always committing adultery with them. She's always immoral with them. This religion that loves the world and the things of the world and the kingdoms of the world. That's what it's talking about. So in chapter 18, we got the two together. This is at the beginning of the tribulation. Remember, chapter 17's Babylon is the religion that's left that Satan will bring an end to. Chapter 18 is prior to that, at the beginning of the tribulation, and what happens to Babylon and the country of Babylon that rules over the nations of the earth. In chapter 18, after these things, we're totally changing subjects. I saw another angel. We have another message in a new subject. So God wants us to pay attention to this message in this new subject. And I saw another angel coming down from heaven. This angel is bringing this message to earth, bringing it down to the very earth, to man. And this angel having great authority. Remember I told you, the more powerful the angel, the more glorious the angel, the more important the angel, the more important the message. And this angel having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. This is an important message, a powerful message, with a powerful angel, with high authority, bringing this important message, which is going to illumine the entire earth. The people that see this, the people that know this, and when it happens, that see what happened, it's going to give them light. They're going to see. And in verse 2, and he cried out with a mighty voice, this angel, saying, what's he saying? Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. So this is at the beginning of the tribulation. When Babylon falls, and as you're going to see, in 1 hour of 1 day, it will so upset the world's governments that they will be in turmoil. They'll be shattered. They'll be broken. They'll be weakened. And in that weakened state for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, this kingdom of nations with the kingdom of the beast will get together to try to restore order and peace and prosperity to the earth. That's what they're going to want. But fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Remember we said in Matthew 13, 31 and 32, that mustard seed grew into a tree that was so big that in the end, the birds of the air, here's the birds of the air I was telling you about. It's satanic activity. It's Satan nesting in it. It's Satan resting in it. And right after that, in verse 33, Matthew 13:33, he talks and goes directly to a little leaven will leaven the whole thing. Leaven in the Bible is always referring to sin, to corruption, to polluting it. And that leaven, a little leaven, by the end of the church age, he says the whole thing is leavened. And that's what you have here with the religion. There's Christians here and they're going to love the Lord. And when that latter day rain pours upon them, they're going to come out of the world, come out of Babylon, turn to God, present their bodies a living sacrifice. And so in verse 3, and all the nations have drunk of the wine and the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. This is the same as chapter 17 with this harlot, this unfaithful religious system. And it's the same here because the country's that way. But at this point, the two are one. The woman is with the country. The religion and the country are one. They service each other. They help each other. They become one. And Babylon falls here. And it upsets the whole world. But the religion goes on until the God uses the Antichrist to end it. And so we have in verse 3, we see this, that not only this religion and this religion of Babylon, but Babylon itself, the nation, they have made, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, of her religion, and of her wealth. And the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth became rich by the wealth of her sensuality. By the wealth of her sensuality. You're going to find out this is a powerful country, a powerful kingdom, a wealthy, wealthy kingdom. And that all the merchants of the earth have become rich with her. They all have a relationship with her. Religion has a relationship with her. And it says, they became rich by the wealth of her sensuality. What does sensuality mean? It's the pursuit of pleasure, whether it's physical or sexual. It's the pursuit of pleasure. And this nation, that nation, Babylon, that's all they care about is pleasure. That's what they live for. They don't care about anything anymore but fun and parties and sex and porn and drugs and drinking. Carousing, living in darkness, living in the world. And we're going to find out who that is. We'll be finding out as we go on the next time. But we had to see why chapter 17 has that Babylon. Because she's the religious part of Babylon. And she lasts after Babylon, the kingdom falls. But in chapter 18, we totally change subjects because this is the beginning of the tribulation, and they are together. And as Babylon, the nation, the country that rules over the kings of the earth falls, the religion had still survived, but God brought an end to it with the Antichrist.